The Galactic Defense Academy on Station Vericon 9 had trained warriors from 43 species over 2 centuries. Keth soldiers with triple-jointed limbs. Varian marksmen whose compound eyes could track 17 targets simultaneously. Genetically heavies whose exoskeletons absorbed plasma fire like sunlight. And then there was Jo. She was human, 5 feet 4 inches of unremarkable biological packaging. With dark hair, she kept tucked under her cadet helmet and eyes the color of old copper. She had arrived on the transport shuttle 6 months ago with a standard-issue duffel, a datapad full of old Earth novels, and absolutely zero modifications. No neural implants. No subdermal plating. No reflex boosters. Just Jo. The first week, the barracks had buzzed with something between confusion and amusement. Menei, a Varian cadet with iridescent wings folded neatly at his back, had been the first to say what everyone was thinking. I have reviewed the human species biological entry in the Academy database, he announced at the mess table, loud enough for the surrounding cadets to hear. Average lifespan, 80 cycles. Bone density, negligible. Sensory range, laughably narrow. Thermal regulation, dependent on textiles. He clicked his mandibles. Why is she here? Die. The Drenithy heavy built like a walking armored vehicle, didn't even look up from her food tray. Politics, she rumbled. The Terran Coalition paid for a seat at the table. The seat came with a cadet. Across the table, high, a slender Keth with luminescent patches along her neck, watched Jo eat in silence. I said nothing. She rarely did. But her patches flickered in a pattern that cadets who knew her recognized as quiet doubt. Wa, the Varian flight instructor's aide, had laughed openly when Jo's first physical assessment scores came back. She scored at the lower threshold of every category. She was slower than a Keth, weaker than a Drenithy, less perceptive than a Varian, and her endurance, while technically decent, was nothing compared to a species that could run for 6 hours without metabolic strain. The Academy's senior instructor, Ethan, one of only 3 human instructors ever to reach senior rank, had reviewed Jo's assessment in his quarters that evening and said nothing. He had simply made a note in his files and closed his datapad. Only Mira, the Academy's combat AI liaison and unofficial record keeper, had access to what Ethan wrote. Watch this one. 3 months in, the jokes hadn't stopped. If anything, they had grown more elaborate. Cadets began a pool betting on when Jo would voluntarily withdraw. Menei had put in an early bet. Di had declined. She said she didn't gamble on things she considered certain. Wa had laughed and put in a generous wager on the end of month 4. Jo said nothing about the pool. She had found out about it through Mira, who was required by Academy protocol to disclose it when asked. Jo had asked. Then she had gone back to her room and done 3 hours of something humans apparently called studying. In the corridor outside her room, Hai had paused and listened to the faint scratch of stylus on datapad, the quiet murmur of Jo rehearsing tactical sequences out loud, and the occasional long silence that meant she was doing something Hai had no reference for. Processing, maybe. Or something the humans called thinking it through. Hai's neck patches flickered again. A different pattern this time. One that had no clean translation in the Academy's common tongue, but which, roughly, meant, I may have been wrong about something. The first crack appeared in month 4. Navigation drills. Every cadet had to plot a 3-dimensional combat approach vector through a simulated debris field in under 4 minutes. It was a reflex exercise designed to test raw spatial processing, a category where Varian cadets typically dominated. Jo completed it in 3 minutes and 41 seconds. She did it wrong, technically. Her approach vector was unconventional, almost chaotic, zigging through gaps that the standard Varian optimization algorithm would have flagged as inefficient. But it worked. It reached the target. And it had a feature that no other cadet simulation had produced. It was unpredictable. Mira flagged the result with a quiet notation in the Academy's performance logs. Ethan read it and said nothing. He made another note. There it is. Menei was told about the score by Wa, who had heard from the simulation technician. He was quiet for a moment. Statistical noise, he said finally. 1 drill. Probably, said Wa. Month 5 brought the marksmanship trials. 72 cadets. 6 rounds of elimination. Simulated hostile targets in randomized terrain with active countermeasures. Di was the heavy favorite. She was always the heavy favorite. She won, as expected, in the first 3 rounds. Raw power, excellent suppression, devastating accuracy at close range. Round 4 reshuffled the terrain. Urban, tight corridors, multiple moving targets with overlapping fields of fire. Jo won round 4. She did it by doing something none of the other cadets had considered. She stopped moving for 11 seconds behind a simulated wall, let the enemy AI adapt to her previous position, and then moved exactly to where the AI's predictive model said she wouldn't be. She picked off 3 targets in 4 seconds, took cover again, and repeated. It worked because the enemy AI was designed by Vorian engineers who thought like Vorians. Jo didn't think like a Vorian. She didn't think like any species in the Academy database. She thought like a human. The barracks were quieter that evening. Not silent. There were still jokes, still dismissals, but quieter. High's neck patches, when she passed Jo in the corridor, burned in a slow, steady amber. I was wrong. The final combat assessment came at the end of month 6. 48 hours. Live simulation. Full environmental hostility. No breaks designated. Cadets could rest if they chose, but time continued. Every decision counted. The scenario: a full-scale extraction mission in a collapsed colony structure with hostile forces, failing infrastructure, and 17 simulated civilian non-combatants to protect. Mira monitored every cadet. It was her purpose. At hour 12, Dai's team had lost 9 of 17 civilians. Strong fighters. Poor tacticians under sustained stress. At hour 20, Manei's team had preserved 14 civilians, but was pinned down with no extraction route. Textbook Vorian precision and textbook Vorian rigidity when the plan broke. At hour 36, Jo's team had all 17 civilians alive. She had done it by sleeping. 6 hours, in shifts, 2 hours herself, rotating her team, while every other cadet pushed through on stimulants and willpower. Her team was the only one that entered the final phase with full cognitive function. She had also eaten, twice, real food from her kit, which she had apparently packed specifically for this purpose, something no other cadet had thought to do. In the final 6 hours, Jo's team moved through the collapse zone with a kind of patient ferocity that Mira had no prior data point to classify. Not reckless, not cautious, something in between that shifted constantly, aggressive when aggression had value, still when stillness was the weapon. When the simulation ended, Jo's team was the only one to achieve full mission success. Mira compiled the final scores. She ran the comparison 3 times, because she was thorough, not because she doubted the numbers. Then she transmitted the results to Ethan. He read them in his quarters. He didn't make a note this time. He just nodded. In the great hall when Mira read the scores aloud, the silence was different from any silence the Academy had heard before. Not embarrassed, not disbelieving, just recalibrating. Manei sat very still. His mandibles were closed. Dai stared at the results board for a long time. Then she looked at Jo. "You slept," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the first time she had spoken to the human cadet as an equal. "You need to," Jo said. "If you're planning to be awake for the part that matters." Was said nothing. He had quietly lost the betting pool. Hai walked to Jo after the assembly ended and stood beside her for a moment. Her neck patches glowed in a slow, warm gold, the Keth color of reassessment. Of a model updated. Of a prior assumption respectfully retired. Jo looked at her and nodded, because she had learned enough about Keth body language by now to understand. Ethan shook Jo's hand in the corridor afterward. No speech. Just a grip, firm and brief, the way humans communicate the things that don't need words. Mira recorded it all. She added a classification to Jo's file that had never been used before at Veracon, 9 Academy. She had constructed it herself, from fragments of older performance reports and one very old Earth document she had found in the Human Cultural Archive. The classification read, Threat Category, Adaptive. Do not underestimate. Do not predict. Do not assume limits. And below it, in Myra's own notation, she is human. That was never a weakness. We simply did not understand what it meant.